The morning sun shone through the bedroom window, casting soft, warm light across the room. The peaceful silence of the house was only broken by the gentle rustling of the curtains as a cool breeze flowed in. It was a moment of calm, a moment of peace. In the center of the room, a crib sat under a soft, pastel-colored canopy. Inside the crib, a baby lay sleeping soundly, wrapped in a light blanket. The baby's small chest rose and fell with each breath, the innocence of sleep so pure and undisturbed. The only sound in the room was the quiet rhythm of the baby's breath, creating a serene atmosphere that seemed untouched by time. Nearby, the baby's mother, Sarah, moved around the room with quiet steps. She was tidying up, straightening the pillows on the bed, and organizing a small basket of baby clothes. Her movements were graceful, like someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Sarah was a mother at peace, wrapped up in the daily routine of taking care of her child. She had always been protective, careful, and always vigilant. But today, something was different. Today was going to be different. Sarah glanced at the baby in the crib, her eyes soft with affection. Her heart swelled with love as she watched her little one sleep so peacefully. She smiled to herself, thinking about how lucky she was. Just for a moment, she thought she could sneak away to do a quick chore. The laundry was waiting in the next room, and she figured she could leave her baby alone for a few seconds. After all, the house was quiet. The air was calm. The baby was sleeping soundly. With a quiet sigh, Sarah tiptoed out of the room, pulling the door gently behind her. She knew her baby would be fine for just a short time. She always made sure the house was baby-proof and the room was safe. There was no reason to worry. Just a few seconds, she told herself. What Sarah didn't know was that just outside, a creature had quietly wandered into the room, a creature that would soon change everything. Outside the house, the wind blew lightly through the trees, swaying the branches gently. Among the shadows and rustling leaves, a young bobcat, no more than a few months old, crept along the edge of the house. Its small golden-brown body blended with the wild surroundings, its keen eyes scanning the environment. It was curious, innocent in its exploration, unaware of the humans inside the house. It moved slowly, almost silently, toward the open window, just a crack, the kind of opening that a curious creature could easily slip through. The bobcat's ears flicked as it noticed quiet sounds from within the house, the baby's soft breathing filtering through the walls. It was drawn to the room. With a swift movement, it jumped lightly onto the windowsill, pushing the window open just enough to slide inside. The room, filled with soft light and warmth, felt inviting to the wild creature. It was strange, unfamiliar, and yet oddly captivating. The bobcat moved cautiously, its paws silent against the soft carpet. Inside the crib, the baby stirred, shifting in its sleep. The bobcat froze, watching. For a moment, there was a stillness, an eerie calm that filled the room. The bobcat's golden eyes locked onto the baby, its gaze unwavering. But the baby, still deep in sleep, did not wake. Sarah was just down the hall, completely unaware of the new visitor in the room. The baby shifted slightly in the crib, letting out a soft coo as it moved in its sleep. Its little arms stretched out, brushing against a blanket, but it did not wake. The peaceful rhythm of its breathing filled the room, undisturbed by the soft, almost imperceptible sounds of the world outside. It was a typical calm morning, the kind of moment Sarah cherished, a moment when everything felt right, everything was at peace. But beneath the surface of calm, something was changing. The bobcat, with its sleek golden-brown fur and piercing yellow eyes, sat still in the corner of the room. Its body was low to the ground, poised and ready, watching the baby in the crib. The room seemed too quiet now, too still, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The bobcat's ears twitched slightly as it heard a rustling sound from the baby's blanket. It raised its head, its sharp eyes narrowing as it focused on the tiny form lying in the crib. The baby moved again, just a slight shift in its sleep, its hands brushing the blanket and giving the bobcat a new focus. The animal's muscles tensed, its body still and alert. There was a pause, a moment of absolute silence, where even the wind outside seemed to still. The bobcat's gaze remained fixed on the baby, its movements slow and deliberate as it took one careful step forward. The delicate light filtering through the window made the bobcat's fur appear almost golden, and its shadow stretched out across the floor, inching closer to the crib. It was a silent, calculating movement, and yet there was something almost innocent about it, an animal simply following its instincts. The baby, completely unaware of the danger in the room, continued to sleep. Its tiny chest rose and fell with each soft, peaceful breath, the rhythm of its sleep so pure and undisturbed. The baby's hand moved again, reaching out slightly, grazing the edge of the crib. The bobcat's yellow eyes flicked to the small hand. For a moment, the bobcat hesitated, watching the baby as if considering its next move. The room felt eerily still now, a heavy silence hanging in the air. Time seemed to slow, every second stretching longer than the last. The baby's hand, small and innocent, inched closer to the bobcat's whiskers. Its tiny fingers brushed against the creature's soft fur, and the bobcat froze. For a brief moment, there was no movement. The bobcat's sharp gaze met the baby's, but the baby, still lost in its dreams, remained unaware of the proximity of danger. A low growl rumbled in the bobcat's chest, a soft warning to itself, but it did not move. Its instincts, its natural sense of caution, told it to wait. The tension in the room grew, like a string pulled too tight, about to snap. In the hallway, just beyond the room, Sarah moved around, folding the laundry, completely unaware of the tense standoff unfolding in the nursery. She hummed softly to herself as she folded the last few shirts, the familiar sounds of the household filling her mind, drowning out the danger just steps away. She thought the baby was safe, just a few feet away, resting peacefully in the crib. After all, it was only a few seconds she had left the room. There was no reason to worry. The house was quiet. The baby was sleeping soundly. But with every passing second, the danger inside the room was growing. The bobcat's eyes never left the baby. Its body coiled in silent anticipation. It could feel the air thickening, the weight of the silence pressing in around it. The baby's soft coos, the slight shifting in the crib, the rustling of the blanket. It was all so delicate, so fragile. Sarah didn't know. She didn't hear the soft scrape of the bobcat's claws against the carpet, or the faint, almost inaudible breaths that filled the room as the creature moved ever closer. She didn't feel the electric charge of danger building in the air, the same way one might feel a storm on the horizon, without seeing a single cloud. Everything felt calm, everything seemed fine. But in that room, only a few feet away, nature was waiting to make its move. The bobcat's nose twitched, its whiskers brushing against the air, and it took another slow step toward the crib. The baby shifted again, this time reaching out toward the edge of the crib, its tiny fingers brushing against the edge of the blanket. The bobcat's eyes widened as it watched the baby's tiny, innocent hand come closer and closer to its whiskers. It was so close now, too close. The bobcat froze, its every muscle tense, its breath held. The air in the room felt thick, charged with the promise of something that was about to happen. Outside, the wind picked up again, the sound of rustling trees and leaves drifting through the open window. But inside, everything seemed still. The bobcat, its gaze fixed on the baby, began to inch closer. Its steps were slow, deliberate, and yet the baby remained asleep, unaware of the danger that loomed just inches away. The bobcat's golden eyes flicked towards the door, its senses sharp and alert. The house was so quiet, it could hear even the faintest noise from outside. It knew the mother wasn't in the room, but it sensed the soft creak of the door down the hall, the gentle footsteps that were getting closer. The bobcat's posture changed. It shifted slightly, preparing to move if needed, but still, it did not act. It was waiting. For a moment, the house was still. The tension was unbearable. The baby moved slightly again, its hand brushing the blanket. The bobcat's eyes locked onto the small hand, its body coiled and ready to react. The moment felt like it would last forever. In the hallway, Sarah's footsteps grew louder, but there was still no sign of danger in her mind. Just a few seconds more, she told herself. A few seconds before she would return and check on her little one. But those few seconds felt like a lifetime in the room, and the closer Sarah got, the more intense the tension became. The baby's tiny hand brushed the bobcat's whiskers once again, and the bobcat flinched. Its golden eyes were wide, its body tense, but the baby remained blissfully unaware, still sleeping peacefully in its crib. The two creatures, so close, yet so far apart in their worlds, shared a moment of stillness before everything would change. The sound of Sarah's footsteps grew louder, echoing down the hall, drawing closer to the nursery. The bobcat, still frozen in place, kept its eyes fixed on the baby, unaware of the approaching presence of the mother. The room was charged with tension, every second stretching on, as if the universe itself held its breath. Just a few more steps. The baby stirred once more in its crib, its small hands moving gently as it instinctively reached out for the edge of the blanket. A tiny coo escaped its lips, barely audible, but the bobcat's ears perked at the sound. Its head twitched towards the baby's movement, and its golden eyes followed every slight motion. The bobcat's body, poised and tense, seemed ready to spring at any moment. The baby, still unaware of the danger, shifted once again, its hand grazing the edge of the crib. Just then, the door creaked open. Sarah stepped into the room, her eyes immediately searching for baby, her senses on high alert. She had always been cautious, always making sure her baby was safe. But today, something felt off. The room was too quiet, too still. Her gaze instantly went to the crib, and that's when she saw it. The bobcat. Her heart stopped for a split second as she processed the sight. The creature was close, its body low to ground, its eyes locked on her baby, her breath caught in her throat. Time seemed to stand still. Everything around her blurred, and for a moment, all she could see was the bobcat and her child. The bobcat didn't move. It simply stared at her, its eyes glowing in the dim light. It wasn't attacking, yet, but the tension in the room was unbearable, as if the animal was sizing up the situation, deciding what to do next. Without thinking, Sarah rushed forward, her instincts taking over. She reached for her baby in a panic, her movements sharp and frantic. "No!" she whispered, almost breathless. Her heart pounded in her chest as she scooped her baby out of the crib, pulling them close to her chest, as though the act itself could shield the child from the danger that lurked in the room. The bobcat, startled by her sudden movement, flinched. Its golden eyes widened, and its body froze for a moment as if processing the change in the atmosphere. The bobcat's posture shifted. Its muscles tightened as though it was preparing to retreat. It took one cautious step back, still watching the mother and the baby. Sarah stood there, holding her baby close, her hands shaking as she stared at the creature. The room was filled with a tense silence, broken only by the soft, quick breaths she took, trying to steady herself. Her baby, still in her arms, remained blissfully unaware of the danger. The baby's tiny head nestled against Sarah's chest, completely at ease, as if everything was normal. The bobcat took another step back, its ears flicking as it considered its options. It did not growl, nor did it lunge. It was as though the bobcat had realized that it had no place in this room, no place among the humans who occupied it. The bobcat's gaze shifted between Sarah and the baby, and then, as though it had decided the situation wasn't worth pursuing, it turned away. Its body moved slowly, almost cautiously, as it backed up toward the window from which it had entered. The silence in the room was deafening. Every second felt like an eternity as the bobcat's eyes flicked back one last time before it turned and slid back through the window. Sarah watched in stunned silence, not yet trusting that the danger was truly over. Her heart was racing in her chest, her mind spinning. She couldn't understand how something so close to her baby could leave without causing harm. She couldn't shake the image of the bobcat's eyes, the calm yet wild presence of the animal. Only when the bobcat was fully out of the window, its figure disappearing into the wild beyond, did Sarah finally exhale, her breath shaky and uneven. She looked down at her baby, still nestled safely in her arms, the little one completely unaware of the peril it had just escaped. "Thank God," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling as she gently rocked the baby in her arms. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her racing heart. A wave of relief washed over her, but it was quickly followed by an overwhelming feeling of disbelief. She had always thought the world outside was dangerous, But she never imagined it could come so close to her baby, to her home. For a few moments, Sarah remained standing there, holding her baby close. Her mind tried to catch up with the reality of what had just happened. She could still feel the weight of the Bobcat's gaze, the stillness in the room as it watched her every move. It was as if the wild had come knocking at her door, and she had been given a terrifying glimpse of how quickly things could change. But for now, the danger had passed. The Bobcat had retreated into the wilderness, and Sarah, with her baby in her arms, stood in the silence of the room, grateful yet shaken by the unexpected visitor. For a long moment, Sarah stood there, her arms wrapped tightly around her baby. The room was silent now, the only sound being the quick, shaky breath she was taking. Her heart pounded in her chest, still racing from the shock of the close call. She couldn't believe what had just happened, the danger that had nearly unfolded right before her eyes. She looked down at her baby, still nestled in her arms, blissfully unaware of how close it had come to harm. Her baby's little face was peaceful, soft, and innocent. The child continued to sleep, not disturbed by the events that had transpired mere moments ago. Sarah's heart swelled with relief, but was quickly overshadowed by the overwhelming sense of fear and disbelief that gripped her. How had the Bobcat gotten so close? How had she not heard it? Her mind was still spinning. The wildness of what had just happened felt surreal, like something that couldn't possibly be real. She stood frozen for a moment, gazing at the open window, the space through which the Bobcat had entered. The calm breeze still drifted in, but now it felt different, unnerving. The sense of peace she had once felt had vanished, replaced by a quiet, lingering anxiety. The Bobcat, though now gone, had left its mark on the room. Its presence still lingered, as if the wild had made itself known in a place that had always felt safe. Sarah slowly moved toward the window, still holding her baby. She peered out into the yard, her eyes searching the wild surroundings for any sign of the Bobcat. But there was nothing, only the soft swaying of the trees and the distant sounds of birds in the trees. The forest beyond her window was still and silent. The Bobcat was gone. It had slipped back into the wilderness as quietly as it had come, its brief appearance in her life now over. But the impact it had left would stay with Sarah forever. She felt a wave of gratitude flood over her as she thought of her baby, still safe in her arms. It could have been so different. The thought made her shudder. She pulled the window shut, locking it firmly this time. As her fingers gripped the window frame, she realized how vulnerable the house had felt just moments ago. The safety she had always taken for granted suddenly seemed fragile, as if it could all be taken away in an instant. The world outside, with all its unpredictable dangers, had come much closer than she could have ever imagined. Taking a deep breath, Sarah finally allowed herself to relax. She turned back toward the crib, still holding her baby tightly. She kissed the top of the child's head, whispering softly, "You're safe now. Mommy's here." Her body trembled slightly, the adrenaline slowly beginning to wear off. The weight of the moment was starting to sink in. For a brief, fleeting moment, she had imagined what could have happened if she had been just a little longer in the other room. If the Bobcat had moved faster, or she hadn't heard the baby stir when she did. The thought sent a chill down her spine. But that was in the past now. The danger had passed. The baby shifted slightly in Sarah's arms, its tiny fingers curling against her skin. Sarah smiled down at the little one, feeling the warmth of the baby's body against her own. She couldn't help but feel a surge of love for the child, a deep, protective love that swelled in her chest. That love had kept her moving, kept her focused, and now it had kept her child safe. She moved slowly across the room, careful not to disturb the baby. Sarah laid the child back in the crib, the soft mattress creaking under the weight. She adjusted the blanket around the baby, tucking it in snugly. The baby made a small sound, a soft hum of contentment, before drifting back into a peaceful sleep. Sarah stood there for a moment, watching her child. Everything seemed so normal, so peaceful now, but the events of just a few minutes ago seemed like a distant memory, a surreal moment that she couldn't quite fully process. The wildness of the world outside had come right to her doorstep, and for a brief moment, the safety she had worked so hard to create had seemed so fragile. Taking one last look around the room, Sarah stepped back, The sense of relief she felt was overwhelming, but so was the realization that life could change in an instant. One moment of peace, 1 second of inattention, could have made all the difference. But for now, her baby was safe. That was all that mattered. Sarah slowly closed the nursery door behind her, her hand resting on the handle as she stood there for a moment longer. She knew she would never look at this room the same way again. The reality of what could have happened was too real to ignore. She took one last deep breath and turned toward the rest of the house, where everything seemed to be just as it had been before. But she knew that in her heart, nothing would ever feel quite as safe as it had before that moment. The house was eerily quiet now, the soft hum of normalcy settling back into place. Sarah sat in the living room, her hands resting in her lap, her fingers slightly trembling. The rush of adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a deep, lingering sense of unease. The baby was still safe in the nursery, but her mind was far from calm. What had just happened kept replaying in her head, as if her brain couldn't quite catch up with the reality of it all. She looked around the room, her eyes scanning the familiar surroundings, the safe haven she had created for herself and her child. But the walls, the furniture, the soft glow of the lamps, they all seemed different now. The world inside her home felt less secure, less unshakable. She hadn't realized how vulnerable they were until now. The Bobcat's golden eyes flashed in her mind. How had it gotten so close? How had she missed it? And more importantly, what would have happened if she hadn't come back when she did? The thought made her stomach churn, and she immediately pushed it away. The baby was fine. That was all that mattered. But deep down, Sarah knew she couldn't just forget about the fear she had felt. The sharp, cold fear that gripped her heart as she saw the Bobcat near her baby. It had been just a few moments, but those moments had felt like an eternity. The raw instinct to protect her child had taken over the second she saw the creature. She hadn't thought about it. She hadn't hesitated. She'd simply acted, driven by the overwhelming need to keep her baby safe. Her breath caught as she thought about what could have happened. What if the Bobcat hadn't been startled by her entrance? What if it had lunged instead of retreating? The thought was terrifying. Sarah felt a wave of nausea wash over her as she realized how easily things could have gone wrong. But she shook the thought away. It was over. The Bobcat was gone. Her baby was safe. It didn't matter what could have happened. What mattered was that everything was okay now. That was what she needed to hold on to. The relief of knowing her baby was still in her arms, still breathing, still safe. Sarah glanced toward the nursery, where the door was gently closed. The baby was sleeping soundly, just as it had been before the Bobcat entered the room. The child had no idea what had happened, no clue that danger had been so close. The innocence of her baby was a stark contrast to the fear Sarah had just experienced. She stood up and walked slowly toward the nursery. Each step felt heavy, the weight of her thoughts pressing down on her shoulders. When she reached the door, she paused for a moment, just standing there, listening to the soft, rhythmic sound of the baby's breathing from the other side. Taking a deep breath, Sarah pushed the door open gently. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw her baby lying there, nestled in the crib, completely unaware of the chaos that had just unfolded in the room. The baby's little face was peaceful, the soft rise and fall of its chest so innocent, so pure. It was almost as if nothing had happened, as if everything was just as it should be. For a moment, Sarah stood there, staring at her child. She felt a swell of love in her chest, a love so deep it took her breath away. This little one, so small, so vulnerable, was everything to her, and she would do anything to protect it. Her mind flashed back to the Bobcat's gaze, to the way it had moved so silently, so methodically. She couldn't help but feel a mixture of awe and fear at the power of nature. The Bobcat hadn't meant to harm her baby. She knew that. It had simply been a curious, wild animal, exploring its surroundings. But even in that innocence, there was a danger that Sarah had never fully understood until now. The world outside her door wasn't just a peaceful, quiet place. It was wild, unpredictable, and full of things she could never control. The thought was unsettling. Sarah gently pulled the blanket up around her baby, tucking it in carefully. She smiled down at her little one, her heart full of love that she couldn't put into words. But underneath that love was a deep, primal sense of protection. She would never let anything, harm her child. The instinct to protect was stronger than anything else. It was a force she couldn't deny, one that had taken over her when the Bobcat had appeared. And it was a force that would always guide her no matter what happened. As Sarah turned to leave the nursery, she felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. Despite the fear, despite the terror she felt just a moment ago, she was thankful. Thankful that she had been there. Thankful that her baby was safe. Thankful that she had been able to act in time. But that gratitude was tempered by something else. A deep, underlying sense of unease. The wild, untamed world outside her home had come too close. She realized that she had never truly understood just how fragile the safety of her home was. She had always thought her house as a sanctuary, a place where nothing could touch them. But today, that belief had been shattered. The safety she had once taken for granted had been tested, and it had nearly failed. Her thoughts drifted to the wider world, the world outside her home, the world where danger existed, where the wild roamed freely, where creatures like the bobcat lived and hunted. It was a world that was always there, just beyond the walls of her home, waiting for a moment of weakness, a crack in the armor. Sarah had always known that the world could be dangerous, but she had never truly grasped how easily that danger could find its way into her life. And yet, in that moment, Sarah realized something else, something important. She had acted. She had protected her baby. She had been strong when it mattered most. That strength was something she could rely on, something that would carry her through whatever came next. The world outside might be unpredictable, but as long as she had that strength, she knew she could face anything. Sarah took one last look at her baby, still peacefully asleep, and closed the nursery door softly behind her. She would be more careful. She would always be vigilant. But more than that, she would always trust in her ability to protect her child, no matter what the world outside might throw at them. Because, in the end, that was the one thing she could control, her love and her strength. The morning passed, and the house began to settle into its normal rhythm once more. The wildness of the outside world, though it had intruded for a brief moment, seemed to retreat as quickly as it had come. The wind outside had calmed, and the sun shone brightly through the window, casting a warm glow across the room. The peace Sarah had once felt seemed to return, but it was different now. It was quieter, more meaningful. Sarah stood in the kitchen, preparing lunch. The familiar sound of the knife chopping vegetables was comforting. The clinking of plates as she set the table a small but grounding reminder how life could return to normal after a storm. But as she moved around the kitchen, her thoughts kept drifting back to that moment, back to the nursery, to the sight of the bobcat near the crib. It was hard to shake the image of the creature's gaze, the stillness of the room, the seconds that felt like hours. The world outside had come knocking, and she had been reminded just how fragile life really was. But more than anything, Sarah had been reminded of how strong her love for her child was. It wasn't just a feeling. It was a force, one that had propelled her into action, one that had made her move without thinking, without hesitation. When she had seen the bobcat near the crib, she hadn't thought twice. She hadn't feared the wildness of the animal. She feared for her baby's safety, and that fear had driven her to act, to save. The wild had come so close, but it hadn't broken her resolve. Instead, it had strengthened it. As Sarah finished preparing the meal, she looked over at the nursery door, still slightly ajar. She thought about how the bobcat had left the room, retreating back into the wilderness from which it came. It hadn't been hostile. It hadn't meant harm. But it had reminded her that nature was always just outside, always lurking, always unpredictable. The world outside her home was beautiful, but it was also untamed, and she had to be prepared for that. Her thoughts turned to the lessons she had learned that day. She had always known that life was unpredictable, that the world outside could be dangerous, but this experience had taught her something deeper. She had learned the importance of being vigilant, of never taking safety for granted. She had learned that life could change in the blink of an eye, a moment of inattention, a few seconds too long, and everything could be different. But she had also learned something else. That strength came from within. Her ability to protect her child wasn't just about physical action. It was about the unwavering love she had, the deep instinct that made her act when needed. It was about knowing that she would always fight to keep her family safe, no matter what. As the baby woke from its nap, Sarah could hear the soft coos and cries from the nursery. Her heart swelled with love and tenderness as she walked toward the room. The sight of her baby, so small, so innocent, brought a rush of emotions, love, gratitude, and a deep sense of protectiveness. She picked up her baby, holding them close to her chest, feeling the warmth of their tiny body against her own. The baby looked up at her, eyes wide and trusting, unaware of the world beyond the safety of her arms. In that moment, Sarah realized that no matter what dangers lay outside, she would always have the strength to protect this little one. "Don't worry, sweetheart," she whispered softly, brushing a lock of hair from the baby's face. "I'll always keep you safe." For Sarah, that promise wasn't just a mother's instinct. It was a deep, unshakable vow. She would protect her child from anything, from anyone, no matter what came their way. The world outside, the wild and unpredictable world, would always exist. But Sarah had something stronger, something more powerful than any wild creature or danger. She had love, and that love was the strongest force of all. As she sat back down, rocking her baby gently, Sarah realized that life would never be the same. The world was wild, yes, but her love was wild too, fierce, untamed, and unconditional. And in the end, that was the one thing that could never be taken away.